Carrying a proud and ancient heritage, pro lacrosse teams are now fielded in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Maryland, Montreal, and Quebec. As a body, these teams comprise the National Lacrosse League, and to a man, they represent the finest players the sport has developed. The game itself consists of 3 20-minute periods and is played in a 200 by 85-foot rink known as a box. There are 6 men to a side, and play is initiated by a face-off or draw. The team which gains possession then tries to move the ball, cradling it in a lacrosse stick toward the opponent's goal line by either running or passing. There's a 30-second clock, and a team must get off a shot on goal during that time. After a save or loss of possession, the offense retreats to its own goal to defend against the opponent's attack. Using a man-to-man or zone defense, the players are permitted to vigorously stick-check an opponent. Slashing is also employed to knock the ball loose and prevent a clean shot on goal. There's 1 point allowed for each goal, and the Philadelphia Wings are always high in point production.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hi there, everybody. Yes, it is indeed your pal, Tim Hanlon, battling a cold and, frankly, trying to do my best John Facenda imitation. This week here on Good Seats Still Available, our curious little journey each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. So we're not going to let a little head cold and a little other sort of gremlins sort of keep us from our appointed rounds. And this week we are ecstatic to get back into pro lacrosse and a very fun and interesting conversation with a couple of guys out of the South Jersey metropolitan Philadelphia area who have been lifelong fans of whatever you could call the pro lacrosse game in this country, which is, a very interesting and perhaps a little niche, I guess, of an exploration and a fandom, but that is absolutely perfect for the kinds of things that we enjoy pursuing here on this little show. And Steve and Dave have set up a treasure trove of information and, most interestingly, game footage from some of the more classic professional, mostly box indoor lacrosse leagues here in the United States. Most interestingly, the original National Lacrosse League from 1974 and 75. Most people who are fans of the indoor and, frankly, outdoor versions of this game don't even realize that there was a pro league in 74 and 75. And it frankly shouldn't come as a surprise, right? Because the 1970s was just a wellspring of new and fresh and challenger leagues and even sports, for that matter. So it's hard not to believe, frankly, that lacrosse had its relatively short shot in the sun in the 70s. And that's actually where Steve Holroyd and Dave Coleman, are our guests this week, kind of got hooked, if you will, on the sport of lacrosse, and in particular the indoor box lacrosse version. And they have created a website called retrolax.com, RETROLAX.com. And it is, it's just, you will lose many minutes and probably hours digging into what seems to be an endless array of stuff devoted to not only the original National Lacrosse League, as we'll talk about in our conversation coming up, but also as they became fans of the sport, they sort of recognized that there was a past even before that, something called the National Lacrosse Association in the late 1960s. I think it was 68 for a very brief span of time. And of course, their fandom has expanded into what is now the reincarnated National Lacrosse League, being the indoor Box Lacrosse League that just announced, as a matter of fact, a couple of days ago as we record this, a new franchise in Long Island, a return, if you will, to Long Island lacrosse in the professional ranks. And today's NLL itself was begotten probably from the roots of the 1970s and the National Lacrosse League version 1. As we've talked about with our previous guest, Russ Klein, about the Eagle Box Lacrosse League in 1987, which then became, over time, the Major Indoor Lacrosse League, and then, of course, its current appellation known as the National Lacrosse League. Anyway, all of that stuff, and by the way, we even get into, with Steve and Dave, a bit of sort of how hot, newly hot, the sport of lacrosse is now, clearly with a whole bunch of different things, especially on the outdoor front, right? The Major League Lacrosse still exists, but we also have a brand new Challenger League or tour coming up with Paul Rabil and his friends from the worlds of private equity. And we're going to get into all of that, the past, the present, and the very interesting future of pro lacrosse with our guests today, Steve Holroyd and Dave Coleman, and retrolax.com, their website. And stay tuned for, in a couple of minutes, a very fun and interesting conversation around all of that. A couple of quick promo items, and we will segue nicely into that chat. As the holidays are upon us, we want to remind you that if you have a fan of sports, either yourself or others in your family or in your friend circles, by all means, please, we've got a bunch of great sponsors that have a tremendous array of stuff relating to teams and leagues no longer with us, and other stuff as well. But and they're great sponsors. They've been terrific for most of the course of this year, and we encourage you to check them all out. I'm just going to read them all out. You check them out. You've heard me tout them all, but they're all tremendous, and they all have some great discounts for you for being listeners of this great little show, and we appreciate all of them for doing so. Oldschoolshirts.com out of Cincinnati. We love them. Great logos, great quality T-shirts, and not just in sports, but all kinds of other pop culture stuff, and you owe it to yourself to give them a chance for your attention and hopefully your purchase wares of their wares. That's oldschoolshirts.com. It's spelled just like it sounds, and promo code is good seats, and you're going to get 10% off all of your purchases there at oldschoolshirts.com. Sportshistorycollectibles.com. Our friend Dean Mitchell out in San Diego have an awesome array of stuff. New inventory seems to be up there just about every other week now. And it is a highly curated and well-crafted site of great stuff, great memorabilia. And you're talking about pennants and programs and media guides and buttons and stickers and all kinds of other stuff from a whole raft of leagues and teams and sports, frankly. Lacrosse is absolutely part of that mix. And that's at sportshistorycollectibles.com. The promo code there is also good seats, and you're going to get 15% off all of your purchases there as well. And last but certainly not least, our friends out of Portland, Oregon. Yes, we go all over the country searching for the great and best sites for you to take advantage of, and that's 503 Sports, and that's 503-sports.com. As of course you know, they are called the king of throwbacks, and it is not without. That's not boasting, frankly. If you get a sense of the great stuff that they've got for you, especially in the realm of football, but more sports to come. They not only have great T-shirts and stuff, but also these small batch, handcrafted, custom uniforms from various teams from various leagues that are no longer with us. And if you fancy yourself a football fan of, say, the WFL, or the USFL, or the World League of American Football. Hell, even the old and original XFL conversation we'll have in a couple of weeks into the new year about the past and the new present of what the XFL is going to become. You got to check out 503 Sports, 503-sports.com. And you're going to be the toast of your neighborhood when you're walking around town with that Houston Gamblers USFL jersey, or, frankly, the something from the Portland Thunder of the WFL, or perhaps the Barcelona Dragons of the World League of American Football. I mean, you want those jerseys, and hell, you want your name on the back of them, and a number too that you'd like. The 503 Sports is the place to go for that. 503-sports.com. And of course, we have a promo code for you there too, and that's SEATS, SEATS, SEATS. That's the promo code at 503 Sports, 503-sports.com for 10% off all of your purchases when you use that promo code SEATS. All right, try them all. You're going to love them all, and we thank all of them this year and hopefully in the next year too for their sponsorship of this humble little show that we'd like to put together for you each and every week. And this week, we're going to segue into pro box lacrosse and our guests, Steve Holroyd and Dave Coleman. Here is our chat that we had back when I was healthier, just a couple of weeks ago. Enjoy.
So why don't you each identify yourselves to our audience and what your sort of day jobs are and or your passion or interest for the sport of lacrosse generally as well.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay. I'm Dave Coleman. I live in South Jersey. I work for a flooring manufacturer called Mannington. I've been there for 27 years. My beginnings in lacrosse go back to 1974. I was 13. The new league was, the new league back then was coming into shape with the National Lacrosse League, and there were televised games in Philadelphia back then. And I showed my parents and went to my first game on my birthday, around my birthday in July, and came home with a stick, and I've been playing ever since.
I'm Steve Holroyd. I'm also in South Jersey. I'm a labor law in Philadelphia by day. Like Dave, I was first introduced to lacrosse in '74 when the Wings came to town. I guess initially it was merely intriguing because I was about 9, and the league was gone in 2 years. And I grew up in a blue-collar town that did not have a lacrosse program, but it was always on my radar screen. And then when it came back in '87 with the Eagle League and the second version of the Wings, I got involved. And a lot like soccer, which, Tim, as you know, is my main background, it intrigued me because it was another sport that had a great history that no one knew about or no one wanted to talk about. And with, along with what you were alluding to a little earlier, with the fact that it really seems to be ready to take that next step into established major league sports status, it seemed like a good time to get involved and start digging up the history of that sport and let other people kind of take over the soccer stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, and Steve, obviously you're quite the prodigious historian on not only lacrosse but also soccer, as most of our listeners probably know if you don't already. Shame on you. But the idea of lacrosse, right, is not only you're getting involved and interested in it, as a fledgling professional league in 74, 75, right, but ironically. It's probably one of the oldest, most earliest documented sports in this country, right? Has a very rich and very long history, way even before, modern times, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's called the creator's game because it's a Native American sport that they've been playing for centuries, around well before the time when the French settlers saw the natives playing this game, waving these big sticks around, and they to them it reminded them of the cross, that would be used in mass, and hence what was called the gataway by the natives, and it was called by another name which escapes me off the top of my head. But the French saw it and said, lacrosse, and here we are. And right, it's probably certainly more so than even baseball. It's probably the oldest game, absent some native kicking games that bear the loosest affiliation with soccer. It's probably the oldest game still played on these shores, and centuries later, it's finally catching on as a professional game.
So each of you guys, give me a sense of what it was about this game, and maybe some of the the reasons that you decided to, I guess, schlep down to the Spectrum at the time and check out an original Wings game, versus say, tons of other sports. And look, in the 1970s, right, there were lots of, fledgling and new leagues, whether it's World Team Tennis or, the ABA or WHA. I mean, there are plenty of other, shall we call them, alternative leagues or sports out there. What was it about lacrosse that kind of, got you to go to the Spectrum and arguably get hooked?
The reasons that I brought back the website that we've got now, going back to when I was a teenager, lacrosse, the indoor game had a lot of variables, if I want to say that word, when it comes to the competition, the toughness, the speed, the agility of the players, the physicality of the game was what drew me into it. And it was like watching ballet on wood, so to speak. It was just something that is like, look at these guys, and you got soccer and baseball and football and everything, but with this game, it was different, and that drew my attention. That's why I still follow the sport to this day, and it's the reason why Retro Lax is back up and running.
Yeah, for my part, it's funny, Tim. You mentioned the other sports. I think my interest initially was, it was a new sport in an era when there was expansion all over the place. I mean, in 1973, soccer came to town with the Philadelphia Atoms. It was big news. And then, the next year, we suddenly have the Philadelphia Bell in a rival football league, Philadelphia Freedoms in a brand new team tennis, and Wings in the sport called lacrosse that I knew nothing about. So I was watching all of them, but lacrosse caught my eye for two reasons. One, it was a game my father would take me to because he couldn't afford Flyers tickets, but he saw the ads about what a tough, hard-hitting game it was, and that was right in his wheelhouse. But then a lot like Dave, I went to the game expecting to see just, violence. And what you saw instead was, while it was a tough game, was just phenomenal skill. I mean, ballet on the boards is not an unfair description. I mean, these guys, what they were doing, not only with their hand-eye coordination. I mean, you saw a guy like John Grant, and we have to say senior these days because of his kid, but John Grant, what he was doing with the stick and behind the back and the no-look passes, and all these guys. I mean, it really was a combination of basketball and hockey and almost track with the speed. It was with the speed involved. It was just a beautiful game, and from the very start, it held my interest. And as I said, it kind of went away in 2 years, and I was too young to really try to find any kind of rec leagues to play in. But I was certainly, when I heard it was coming back in '87, and fittingly enough, at least in Philadelphia, with a team that was taking the original name and logo of the old team, I was first in line, or figuratively first in line. I'm sure Dave was there too, and it's just an interest that stayed with me. And even when the second Wings left in 2014, now they're back. And in my personal case, interestingly, they're sort of brought back with a guy with a soccer connection. The current commissioner of the National Lacrosse League got his start in soccer, so it sort of dovetailed nicely for me to have it all back.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I think too that you both were sort of I want to say spoiled, but you were arguably following the team in the National League, the first one in 74-75. That was probably the most, I guess, stable, if you could call that, for a 2-year league, but probably the most visible, right? Because a lot of the footage that you guys have on this site, and I'm sure there's probably others more to come. There's a very sparse amount of original National Lacrosse League video out there on YouTube and elsewhere, right? And your trove, frankly, a lot of it seems to come from, or have come from, Philadelphia broadcasts.
Correct.
I get a sense that and maybe you can give me some reasons as to why, the Philadelphia franchise might have been the most, shall we say, in the tank in terms of media and marketing and that kind of stuff, versus the other 5 teams, or the movement of the other teams too, in that 2-year period.
Well, that was the reason why, going back to 1994, I started a website. I first started writing on the internet, and it was a website called Sports World, because you would go to the Philadelphia newspapers day in and day out, and they covered the Flyers, the Phillies, the Sixers, and the Eagles. And that was it, basically. Now, back in 94, the Wings were working on their third MILL championship. They've already won it twice back in 89 and 90. And it was like, I just wanted to present something that, like, I wanted to know what was going on with arena football. I got a passion for arena football dating all the way when that first started back in 87. The indoor soccer game, the outdoor soccer game. And then I brought in like 6 minor league hockey leagues that were never covered. And it's like, this is what piqued my interest. And moving to 98, it was like with, personal things going on. It was just that, like this was becoming too much. Because I was covering 10, 11 leagues by myself back then. And it's like, okay, let's break it down to what are you really true about? And it was the indoor lacrosse. So I brought in NOL lacrosse, which covered the 74-75 league only. And I ran that up until 2004, 2005. And then there was a lot of major indoor lacrosse film at my disposal. If I didn't record it myself back then, because I was a season ticket holder for years during the Major Indoor Lacrosse era, I had other people, I had other repositories that I could go to bring this film in. And I incorporated that with the old league in 74-75, and I created Lax TV in 2006, and that ran up until 2011. Yeah, there's a lot of Philadelphia footage on the site, but there's a contrast, with Buffalo and Boston and New York. It was sitting in a box for almost 7 years. I get back on Facebook after a 5-year absence, and people from Philly were like, like with the different pages that they got on Facebook now with the 74-75 league and the Major Indoor League, and it's like, you got the archive, and it's like, yeah, I got the archive, it's sitting here. And it's like, you need to bring it back. And it's like, it's like being a duck out of water, because I had to reteach myself everything, because the technology from when I did it to now is like night and day, where it took me just to do one game back then with the technology that we had at our disposal, 10 to 12 hours a game. And I started raising my kids on my own after 2003, and it just became so time-consuming that, it was like eating pizza every day. And after a while, you get tired of eating pizza every day, so I just decided to pull the reins back and concentrate on what needed to be concentrated on. Now, 3 hours a game, and I did 70 games altogether. So it took. That was the first leg on the site. It was over 2 months still in film, just straight film, the editing, the this and that. You don't see too many commercials. If you go to watch a game, I cut all the commercials out, and I did what editing that I needed to do. And the big part of the site was Tim wants to watch a game from 1988 or from 1992 or from 1974, whatever. You just go, boom, it's right there.
So that's interesting, because we started sort of with this National Lacrosse League thing in 74 and 75, right? It almost feels like, from what you're describing and all the work that goes into it, and probably more to come, that it's an interesting sort of midpoint, if you will, in terms of, I guess, the modern box lacrosse kind of indoor thing, right? Because as you guys recognized and went back as you got more familiar with the game, or maybe wonder where it went, and maybe got curious about sort of like what preceded it. You're enmeshed into the National Lacrosse Association, right, which was a shorter blip of time back in '68. But obviously, as you referenced, right, the late '80s and onward, of the Eagle Box Lacrosse, then the Major Indoor Lacrosse League, and then what is now known as the reincarnated, I guess, or rebranded National Lacrosse League. It almost feels like it's its own sort of, a mini timeline, right? Of maybe from that late 60s era until wherever it's going today in the, in the future indoors. It feels to me like you're almost backfilling, a whole host of historical moments that certainly before the major and the current National Lacrosse League, there's lots of gaps, and I suspect treasures to be discovered in people's, attics and garage sales from the past.
Yeah, that's like kind of my thing. I learned from soccer. When I get into a sport, I know instinctively that there was clearly something before this. So, I knew about the National Lacrosse League in '74, but I just figured out it's not, someone did not just wake up and decide, hey, let's try box lacrosse in 1974. And you do a little digging and you find out about the '68 league. You do a little more digging and you find out that, the sport itself was literally invented in 1931 by hockey arena owners looking for a reason to fill their arenas in the summertime. And Tim, given your soccer background, stop me when that sounds familiar, right? Let's form a league because we need to fill dates. And you realize, wow, there was a lot out there. I mean, 1932, an American box lacrosse league playing in baseball stadiums was tried, owned by the baseball teams, again, looking for product. But, and then you find, as you put this out there, and I know Dave's found this too, you put this out there and suddenly you start getting emails and Facebook comments from, the niece of someone who played in that league. And I think ultimately, Dave and I both we're hoping that people will start contacting us and saying, hey, the 1968 league, that was on TV in Hamilton, and we taped it on an old VHS. Here you go. It would be great to unearth that stuff, but like everything else, until people realize there's a place to go, these people know they have that stuff in their attic, but they have no idea where to take it. We're hoping that as RetroLax gets out there a little bit more, hopefully maybe people are hearing this podcast. They'll say, oh, look, here's a couple of guys who are interested in it. They'll reach out to Dave. Hey, here's what we got. And we could start getting the stuff beyond 74, 75 stuff other than the wings and get that out there. And then, the site will grow and hopefully with it, the online memorabilia will also grow.
And I have, to a point, friends that used to play the game and that are involved with different organizations in Canada that have told me firsthand that there are things that are coming about and whatnot, and they tell me what they have, and it's like it's going to take some digging, it's going to take some research, it's going to ultimately got to pay the cost in order for it to bring it to the forefront. But eventually, as time goes on with this, as I said, you got to crawl before you walk. It's going to be interesting to see what footage is going to be made available for us to work with in order to present it to the community. The thing that drew me to Steve the most when we first started creating this site was the fact that he had a knowledge that I didn't, which is a good thing, because you don't want to be, like, oh, well, I've got this too, and all this. I mean, he goes back to the turn of the 1900s, and even earlier than that, with the things that he's finding that is bringing a different perspective to what we're doing here. It's like, it's not just generally the 74, 75 in the 80s, 90s MILL. I mean, he's, with the National Lacrosse Association, and it's like, I heard about it, but I wasn't familiar with it. Well, I've got a firsthand knowledge of it now, thanks to Steve. And the 1904 Olympics article that he wrote last week, I want to say it was, that it was like, you could put a blip up on a blog post. My friend researches. He just take a look at this, and it's like, wow. And he really goes out of his way to research all the early lacrosse history that involves box, field, this, that. You know, I mean, he's really done a good job. So it's a matter of time and being in the right place at the right time. And we have quite a few people out there that are contributing, old players from the old 74-75 league, from the Major League, that are contributing to this site as we go along. And I had a player that played for Syracuse and Quebec back in 74-75, Pat Differ, who told me straight up, he goes, this site will never be done. And he's right. It won't ever be completely finished due to the fact that there's so much history that's out there that needs to be brought to the forefront. And we've got nothing better else to do with our free time. You know,
yeah, I was gonna say, like for example, there's a gem of a piece of video there, a Pathé newsreel of Toronto versus Montreal from 1932. Am I correct? Is that a Madison Square Garden exhibition?
Yes, it was a teaser. Those two teams had played in the 1931 Canadian Box League, the very first league, and it was a charity event, but it was also basically a teaser for the American Pro Box League that was going to start about a month later. And yeah, somehow Path was there, and they filmed it. And of course, in what's become a common theme throughout the history of the indoor game, you know, they naturally focus on the violence as opposed to the skill. But yeah, I mean, go figure. The very first box lacrosse game played in the United States, and British newsreels are there to capture. What are the odds?
So where is most of your footage coming from? Like, the Pathé stuff is probably, YouTube or somewhat commonly findable, but it seems like a bunch of this stuff is unique to your sources and maybe hasn't even been seen really out there before. Is that right?
I have. I should have sent you the picture of the box that I keep my film in, because when I first started this, I posted the picture of the box, and it's like it's time to get busy. I have, oh dear Lord, as I said, there's 70 games online right now. That was all for my collection. If I didn't have it personally, I bought it. I bought it off people. And I just added, it just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And that, this is, I looked at the box in the office today and it was like, I got to put this up.
What are your sources? So where do you, I mean, are you the sort of quintessential, sports memorabilia, or garage sale or eBay fiend, looking for this kind of stuff? Or does it find you maybe perhaps as the site is relaunched and get out there and hopefully?
It finds me, but at the same time, I find it. It's people that are within the lacrosse within the lacrosse family. If I can, I think that's the right way to say it. They come to me and it's like, hey, I got this. Do you have it? And it's like, no. And it's like, they run me a copy. There was a source outside of Philadelphia years ago that I went up to 93 with him, and he just ran off copies of what he had, and I paid him for his time and just brought it in-house. And it's as I said, it's amazing what people will bring to you, what they will put forth, and it's like, can you do anything with this? Well, at the time I was doing something with it, and now we're doing something with it again. And as I said, everything's sitting in a box in my office, and that's where it's at.
In some ways, we got lucky, because going back to something you said earlier, Tim, Philadelphia had virtually zero lacrosse history. I mean, the Wings were dumped here in '74 because they wanted to put these teams in traditional hockey cities, and in fact, the Wings' first game was the same day the Flyers won the Stanley Cup. So from the very start, the two teams were kind of linked together. There's a player on the Wings named Doug Favell, who was a very popular goalie with the Flyers the previous year. He wound up being traded for Bernie Perrant, and while that worked out well, people remembered Doug. And so we were kind of lucky in that both in 74, 75, Wings games were being televised because people wanted to see what the little brother of the Flyers was like. And that's really kind of the way they were marketed. And even in 2 years, they had such a good reputation that when the league came back, when the sport came back in '87, we had a local, the predecessor to Comcast, actually, Prism, the local cable channel would broadcast these games. So we were fortunate that even if we weren't getting to the Spectrum, we could watch them on TV and, more important, tape them. So we were in the one market that actually had content. So more Dave than me. I remember I taped the first year and then sort of stopped. But Dave was taping all these games, so he had the Wings database, if you will, to start. And then, as he was saying, and then as he's getting around, other people are saying, "Hey, I've got this," and sharing starts. And so we were able to develop an archive. But we're kind of fortunate that we both learned the game in Philadelphia, as opposed to, say, being a soccer fan in Memphis in '78. Well, you're on an island, that you're on your own. Philly, the media embraced it, which made getting access to this stuff a little easier.
All right, time for me to catch my breath, get a cool, tasty beverage, and remind you, while we do so, that our friends at Audible are here to remind you that you can get a free audiobook download of your choice from over 180,000 titles. If you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats and use that link, of course, to try for yourself a free audiobook on us, gratis, if you will. And you will love the idea of audiobooks. It's an awesome way to kill time and occupy and stimulate your mind, perhaps when your eyes are busy doing something else. And of course, there are plenty of interesting books to be found, especially in the world of sports and sports history. I think our audience might enjoy a few of these, of course, including the seminal work by baseball legend Jim Bouton. It's called Ball 4. It is not only written, but it's also narrated by him. You could use your free credit for that book. And of course, as you know, Ball 4 centers around the 1969 one-year wonder that is the Seattle Pilots of Major League Baseball, but obviously the background for a whole lot of other observations about the sport of baseball. And it remains to this day perhaps one of the most celebrated writings about the sport of baseball in this country. Of course, you can also, if you're not a big baseball fan, you can go into the world of soccer with the autobiography called My Turn by Johan Cruyff, the late Johan Cruyff, perhaps one of the world's best ever soccer players. He of Dutch heritage, of course. Plenty of great legendary years at club play as well as national team play for the Dutch team, as well as, for our audience, maybe a little bit of interest, his journeys in the North American Soccer League in the late 70s and early 80s with the Washington Diplomats and the Los Angeles Aztecs. And of course, if you're into football, there's probably no better book, especially if you find yourself really interested in the sort of deep and rich history of the NFL, with the book called NFL Football, A History of America's New National Pastime. It is written by Richard Crepeau and narrated by Marlon May. That, too, is an audiobook that you could choose from over, like I said, 180,000 titles. There's got to be something in there that's going to be of interest to you. And by all means, give it a try. And we appreciate your doing so at audibletrial.com/goodseats. And again, you're going to get your free audiobook download. You can cancel it anytime. And again, even if you cancel it, you can keep that book as long as your device exists. So again, we appreciate it. Give it a try. audibletrial.com/goodseats. And now, back to our conversation. Before we get off the original NLL, besides your memories of going to games and sort of getting hooked as kids/teenagers, what is your, and maybe this is some of it is maybe now informed by what you've learned since. Well, what was it about the league? Why did it sort of come and go so quickly? Maybe it's a longer story for another day, but why did it sort of, 6 teams, mostly on the East Coast, but it seemed to have it left as almost as quickly as it arrived, it seems.
74. You had the Wings, you had the Maryland Arrows, the Rochester Griffins, the Syracuse Stingers, and Rochester and Syracuse, and it's surprising even to this day, they're lacrosse hotbeds in the state of New York, without a doubt. You had the Montreal Quebecois, and you had the Toronto Tomahawks. They played a 40-game season in 74, and it got to the point in Toronto because Jim Bishop, who was tied directly with the National Lacrosse Association that Steve personally works with back in '68, he always had a vision of making indoor lacrosse professional. Without a doubt, that was his lifelong dream. From '68, they went to '74, and they created the league. But Toronto was in a position to where if you went to Maple Leaf Gardens during the summer, it wasn't air conditioned. And that dropped their attendance down to, I mean, the last time the Wings played up there, and I have documentation of it in the office, there was not even 1,000 fans in the stands for their last game against Philadelphia, which is sad in a way because box lacrosse in Canada is their national sport. Come '75, Toronto sold their naming rights to Long Island. That's where the Long Island Tomahawks came from. The roster from Toronto went to Boston. That became the Boston Bolts. The Rochester Griffins moved from Rochester to Long Island. Their rosters went to the island. Syracuse went to Quebec. Now, Rochester, during the '74 championship game, and Sports Illustrated wrote an article on it, which we republished on our site, drew 2,100 fans for a championship game. And that was kind of like the nail in the coffin for Rochester back then. So they moved their operations to Long Island. Syracuse moving to Quebec. Syracuse had attendance problems also, 2,000-3,000 a game. It really didn't catch on because even with the Major Indoor Lacrosse League, Baltimore, Washington, like you get into field lacrosse hotbeds, the purists are like saying, oh, this isn't lacrosse, this is a circus, and this and that, and the whole 9 yards. So the field lacrosse fan really didn't catch on to what was going on indoors. Now you go back to the National Lacrosse League back in '75. They played a 48-game schedule, which was originally supposed to be 56. They cut 8 games out of the schedule. And the Quebec Caribou eventually won the championship in '75. When '76 came around, there were 2 out of the 6 franchises that were struggling financially. Montreal, because of the Olympics in 1976, withdrew. So you're down to 5 teams. 2 out of the 5 were struggling. The other 3 just looked at each other and it's like, we're not going to bail them out. So it was like, that was the end of the National Lacrosse League back in the '70s.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's giving you a very good micro view. Now, so you could take the macro view, Tim, and we've seen leagues come and go, and it really was the same old story. A bunch of people, for all the Jim Bishops and Morley Kells who were really passionate about making this a pro sport, a lot of the people with the money were really just looking for a quick buck. And look, every new league has franchise movement and things like that. But for the Olympics, as David alluded to, but for the Olympics, the National Lacrosse League might have gotten over the hump because Montreal drew well, Philadelphia drew well, Maryland drew well. Philadelphia and Maryland had plenty of money. The owners there were well-heeled and happy to dig in. You would have found your way with other franchises. As Dave said, it's shocking, although you've just seen it throughout the history of the game, that so-called box lacrosse hotbeds like Rochester and Syracuse simply will not support the pro game. Similarly, in the 70s in particular, field lacrosse hotbeds like Long Island and Maryland were not going to deal with the bastardization that was the indoor game. Again, sounds like soccer. It's probably because it is. But for the Olympics, because quite literally, Montreal didn't have a place to play. They would have hung in there, and they might have been able to go forward with a 5-team league, 4-team league even. But when Montreal didn't have a place to play because the Forum was being used because of the '76 Olympics, no one had the wherewithal to go on hiatus for a year and come back, and they folded up their tents. But it's unfortunate because, again, every new sport, every new league has these growing pains. And lacrosse, had they gotten over that rather artificial hump of the Olympics, something that wouldn't be there otherwise, the landscape might be a lot different today. But as it is, they had too few people who were committed, not enough people willing to see long term. And again, it was almost like North American Soccer League '68. Oh, the quick buck's not here, I'm bailing. And as a result, it took another 12 years until someone was willing to try again, and that was with the Eagle League.
Yeah, that's especially interesting. We had, as you guys probably know, we've had Russ Klein on here about March of earlier this year. And Russ, one of the things we talked about with him was between he and his partner Chris Fritz, right, who were the co-creators of the 1987 Eagle Box Lacrosse League, and then what then became the MILL, two L's there, thank you, is this sort of balance between what you guys are alluding to, the sort of purist, outdoor lacrosse, type person, certainly who has played the game and understands the rules and the nuances, and the, I don't know, I guess more the excitement junkie, hockey-like, basketball-like, indoor soccer-like version of this game, faster, more goals, more excitement, probably more attractive to the general sports fan, general excitement and entertainment fan. And I think if I remember our conversation correctly, I mean, Russ was kind of pretty straightforward and matter of fact about it. He didn't claim to be a lacrosse purist by any means. Like a lot of business people who, get the money together and the wherewithal to do this, saw enough of the game and felt it to be enough of an entertaining product that could be further enhanced and brought into the world in multiple cities with various attractions and promotional sheen, shall we say? But I guess that's what I kind of want to get to is the sort of this delicate balance, I guess, between the sport of lacrosse, which is, as we've talked about, almost 100 plus years old, even more than that, and the sort of need for sort of excitement, and it probably even before television really sort of became a really big deal in terms of modern day sports. I mean, I guess which is it, right? So, and maybe this is also a question about today. There's a question in here somewhere. Between sort of the purist of the game outdoors and the excitement and the American way, I guess, of needing things that are entertaining for their sports dollar.
Yeah, the American exceptionalism angle is interesting. Although again, this was box lacrosse was a Canadian invention, and again purely to fill hockey rinks in the summertime. The Eagle League guys. As Russ was pretty clear during his podcast, and he was a promoter. He was just looking for something to promote, again, to fill buildings that were otherwise empty. But he did do enough homework, and I think he learned a little bit from the Super Series that he ran the previous year, sort of as a test to see whether there would be an audience for box lacrosse. He realized that the Canadians were still light years ahead of the Americans, and so we needed to do a league that was something that would not only Americans would be competitive, but also something that might not scare off the field lacrosse crowd as much. And that's why with the Eagle League, it had a slightly different set of rules than traditional box, and initially it was primarily American collegiates. Although he might have been. While his goal might have been to let's have a league that an indoor league that the field people would embrace, not for nothing, he took the same tack that leagues had been taking since the 1930s, and his commercials were highlighting the violence. But there was that. But at the same time, I think anyone that did their homework recognized that as opposed to team tennis, which was really never going to go over, or spring football. In the USFL's case, it's a bit tough to take. I think people recognize that box lacrosse really had an audience. I mean, the people that liked it really liked it, and it was a question of hanging in there long enough to get a second generation of people to like it. So it's like that old commercial: you tell a friend, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and it grows exponentially. And I think MILL was smart. France was smart enough. Klein and France were smart enough to say, hey, we may have something here if we're willing to dig in. And that's, he was smart enough, as your podcast covered, He understood the value of the single entity model, keeping control of costs, keeping control of player contracts, and that's why and not being ambitious with 56 game schedules that you have to dial back to 48. Initially we're going to play 8 games. That's enough, and that's why that league. There's a reason why we're still talking about the National Lacrosse League that's been around since 1987, as opposed to any one of a number of other leagues that can only go back to soccer. MLS started in '96 or whatever. So they did their homework and they got it right the second time around.
And that's why Russ and Chris boiled it down to 4 locations when they started the Eagle League in '87: Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, and New Jersey, which played out of the Meadowlands up until 1989. They switched from the Meadowlands to the Nassau Coliseum back in '89 and became the New York Saints. You predominantly had American field players playing the box game in this league for the first 2 seasons. You really didn't see a Canadian-influenced team until the Detroit Turbos came along back in 1989, if I'm not mistaken. In 1989, they came in, this, that, the whole 9 yards. But again, Philadelphia won the championship in '89 and '90. And in '91, the Gates were coming out of college, Gary and Paul Gate. And they were phenoms in Syracuse on the field game. They were absolute phenoms. And they were awarded to Detroit in 1991. And they played there for 2 seasons, and they won the championship in 1991. But in 1992, even though the Turbos went unbeaten during the regular season, something else happened. And this is where the Canadian influence in the Major Indoor Lacrosse League came from, the Buffalo Bandits. They lost their first 3 games. But the majority of that team came from Peterborough, Brampton, St. Kitts, the entire Ontario province, more or less. And once Buffalo got on a roll, they won the championship in '92-'93. They lost the championship to Philadelphia in '94. Didn't make the championship in '95 and won it again in '96. They were just like a juggernaut because of the Canadian box influence that was brought to the United States through this league. And it just amazed me back when we talk rivalries. There wasn't really a rivalry amongst the 4 teams. Okay, we played Jersey, we played Baltimore, we played Washington, and then Detroit and New England came along in '89. Washington went to Pittsburgh in '90. Detroit was there, and it was like not until '92 when Buffalo came to the Spectrum and won the championship in overtime. That was your first true rivalry out of this league, Philadelphia and Buffalo. And it went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, year in, year out. And it's like it was an exciting time for indoor lacrosse in Philadelphia when we played the Bandits. And as I said, it's like you got to crawl before you walk. Chris and Russ understood that, and they finally got it right. There was franchise shifts from where, if a franchise was struggling, like Washington, before their players went to Pittsburgh and the wave was dissolved, it was like they took a look at the markets, they took a look at everything, and the teams that rolled over into the National Lacrosse League when it became the National Lacrosse League again in '98 survived for the most part.
So another question I guess I'd throw out there is what is it about the indoor game that makes it or has made it such a, a tantalizing, subject for making, pro leagues out of it, right? Versus, say, the outdoor game where my guess is that there has not been as much of a movement or frankly success on creating more of an outdoor league. Now, obviously, there's today's Major League Lacrosse, and we could talk about where it's going in a second. But up until fairly recently, with Jake Steinfeld and friends, it doesn't seem like there has been as much activity on the possibilities of a sustained outdoor field game. And I'm guessing that's largely because of where it's popular, the popularity of the outdoor game at the collegiate level.
The field lacrosse stereotype continues to be affluent suburban kids playing in institutes of higher education where education is really a priority, like Yale. Yale's the current defending champions. And I think, the old notions of playing the sport, the gentleman's game, and playing for the love of the game and not for professionalism, I think a lot of those Victorian concepts still exist in the field game. I mean, there was a brief attempt in 1988 to do an professional outdoor league, and it died within 3 weeks. The MLL's been around since 2001, but it's barely made a dent. I mean, I would say until they find their red grange, to use the football analogy, college is always going to eclipse the pro game. We'll see if Paul Rabil, we'll see if his grand experiment that just popped up about a month ago, and we'll talk about later, is going to push it over the hump. As opposed to box lacrosse, to Americans, unless you were in Rochester or Syracuse, it didn't exist. So they could market it as a new sport initially, both with the National Lacrosse Association of '68 and in the original National Lacrosse League. It was being marketed as a summer game, again, largely because that's when the arenas were available, not because someone thought, oh, this would be a good way to grow the game. And now it's a winter game because the Klein and France realized, look, no one wants to go inside in the summertime, so we'll make it a winter game. But I think people like sports with hitting. People like hockey's been popular, football's been popular. Soccer has struggled for many years because it didn't have the violent element that people like to see. And I think now I think people are turning to it because now football's almost seen as too violent. The people playing it are damaging themselves. So the thought is, where do you go to get entertainment without necessarily watching people literally kill themselves? And a lot of attention, both indoor and outdoors, turning to lacrosse. And indeed, Dave mentioned the Gates. I mean, the Gates revolutionized the outdoor field game, but these were two kids who grew up playing box lacrosse. They took box lacrosse skills and brought them to the field game, and you're seeing a lot more of that now. There's a lot more cross-pollination, which is, I think, also what's making the indoor game more palatable to field people who for years would turn their noses up at it. Now they're saying, hey, wait, there's a skill set there that is lacrosse, whether indoor or outdoor, it's still lacrosse, and there's more of an appreciation for it. And I think now you're seeing, again, a resurgence. I mean, the National Lacrosse League almost folded 5 years ago and almost folded about 7 years before that. I mean, it never really – it was just sort of under the radar. But most recently, even before Nick Sakevich took over as commissioner, the league was really starting to climb back because I think field people have discovered it, have discovered its value, both as entertainment and as a teaching tool for field players. And now you have an interest that wasn't there before. Right, Dave, you think?
I couldn't agree more with the recent announcement from the National Lacrosse League of affiliating itself with the the Arena Lacrosse League, for the players that don't make the cut the first time around. It gives them another resource to go to hone their skills indoor. I can see the Arena Lacrosse League growing as time goes on with more field players coming into the game that want to. There's a lot of possibilities on the table right now for a lacrosse player. The Major League Lacrosse on the outdoor, what Paul Rabil's doing, the National Lacrosse League. And it's like, if you really want to learn the box game, go to Canada. That's the best advice that I could give a field player in the United States right now. If you really want to learn, you'll get a quick education real quick in Canada. And it doesn't matter which coast you play on, because the West Coast, the BCLA and all the associations out in British Columbia. It's great. They have the tools for new players that want to get involved with this game. I can't understate that enough.
It looks for a while that until kind of recently that with Major League Lacrosse on the outdoor side and the National Lacrosse League on the indoor side, that there was, I wouldn't call it an agreement or an understanding, but it did seem to me for a period of time there that the aspirant professional lacrosse player could actually make a fairly decent go at it by being able to play year-round, both indoors and outdoors, not unlike maybe some of the a couple of years there for pro soccer for a while, where people looked at it as an opportunity for a full year's worth of play and employment. But it also seems that the schedules and whether it's by design or by happenstance have seemed to become much more unaligned and or counter to that possibility. And also, I get the sense that, and again, my ignorant, just outsider's observation, that that's arguably because there's a desire for the better talent and maybe having one entity sort of win that talent versus the other one, versus supporting each other.
Well, if the leagues could all come together and decide on the best route available for the individual player. I'm not talking about okay, this is player A, and it's like he wants to play indoors, he wants to play outdoors. There was a lot of conflict back in the day. You're either playing indoor or outdoor, that's it. I mean, it was cut and dry, plain and simple. Now they're coming. It's coming to fruition to where the money is starting to come into all of these leagues, to where players can make a full-time profession out of playing both indoor and outdoor, and it's great to see. It really is great to see, because the majority of the indoor players back in the MILL days, and we'll go back to the 80s and the 90s, they were getting paid. It depends on who you were. The way that it was explained to me by John Grant Sr. in a phone call that we had the other night, back in 74, 75, they rated their players Tier A, B, and C. If you was a Tier A player, you was getting top money. B, you was in between. C was the lowest. And it afforded them the opportunity to give up the jobs that they had at the time to play full time. I mean, it's a 40-game schedule. It wasn't an 8-game or a 10-game or a 12-game schedule. It was a 40-game and a 48-game schedule in 74, 75, and they made a living out of it. Now you get back into the Major Indoor Lacrosse League, and it was like hundreds a game per player, depending on where you sat and who you were and your skill level and this and that. And I'm sure they had their tiers also. I can't really confirm that, but it was like they held second. I mean, they worked. They worked for a living. It would be like me going into the Major Indoor Lacrosse. I work for a flooring manufacturer, and it's like I play lacrosse part-time, and I pick up a couple $100 and I go back to work on Monday. Now it's getting to the point to where you're seeing the ownerships bringing the money to the table. As again, you crawl before you walk, but the opportunities are there for the players to play year-round. There's no sense in doing anything else. This is what you want to do it.
And that's where Rabil's League, we'll see if it takes it to the next step, because, Tim, you're saying about, there was the opportunity to make a career. The fact is, both indoor and outdoor, both of these leagues, the players are part-timers in the sense that, they have other jobs. They're still working other jobs. Dave alluded to the MILL of the 80s, and early 90s. It's still the case. I mean, these guys, they're practicing on a Friday, they're playing on a Saturday, they're going back to work Sunday. And the outdoor league's the same way. I think one of the reasons for the most recent, the very recent, last week, the labor dispute that finally got resolved in the NLL was the players would like to be able to make this a full-time gig. And indeed, the sport itself, both indoor and out, is for all, it's getting bigger and it's expanding. But I think perception-wise, fans, fans aren't going to really take it seriously until they know that these players are actually full-timers. And again, we keep mentioning his name, and I know we're going to get to him in due course, but again, that's where Paul Rabil and the grand experiment that is the Premier Lacrosse League is going to be interesting.
Yeah, and Russ Klein, we kind of alluded to this too. I mean, in many respects, that sort of part-time, sort of lunch pail kind of, mentality of the player was actually almost a marketing bonus.
It was. Initially, it was. Initially, it was a real plus. But I think people are tired of it. Initially, it had a certain charm, 87, 88, 89, whatever. My view as a fan and talking to other fans is that it's not cute anymore. They want to see the next step.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think too, Russ kind of alluded to the fact that the economics now then change, and then would a major indoor lacrosse league of based on the business model and centrally controlled and relatively controlled player salaries or part-time in that nature, would that then, if you're going to basically now say, well, we're now at a higher level, players want more, full-time type salaries, well, then, some different business things need to go into the equation. And perhaps this is the time then to now segue into this Premier Lacrosse League thing that has been. I mean, it was interesting because a couple of months ago, there was sort of this curious announcement, seemingly out of nowhere, by Sandy Brown and the Major League Lacrosse folks, that there was going to be almost, sort of a doubling of player salaries. And then literally within a week's time, you saw this mega announcement from Paul Rabil and his investors, which I guess come from the world of private equity, I'm not mistaken, to create an alternative, right, outdoor field play, but not necessarily on a franchise model, but sort of a almost like a Big Three basketball touring kind of model where he goes city to city and sort of makes a little festival out of the whole thing, yet with competitive dynamics to it. So this seems to me like the arrival of at least some anticipated business expectations, and thus perhaps convincing a certain group of people to put some bigger money behind this, with potentially the promise of things like insurance and a full-time salary and that kind of stuff. And I guess that's what it takes maybe to take this conversation to the next level.
Exactly. And Paul Rabil got his ducks in a row before he announced all this. Wall Street and the what do you want to call them? The private investors that are backing all of this. It seems like it's going to be very interesting, if not promising, for lacrosse players in the future. They want to make it to where this is all you're going to do. And if they can get on board with the indoor game, we're reverting back to what we've already talked about. You could be playing lacrosse year-round, without a doubt. You take a look at it, it's time. It really is time. You shouldn't have to work a second job or a third job in order to make ends meet. And here you are getting slapped around every weekend or every week, and you're going back to work, with whatever injuries or whatever you've sustained in the last game that you played. I mean, this is, insurance, money, stability. That is the key right there. Stability, without a doubt.
But the stability part is where this is interesting, because Rabil, he's not just being visionary by saying, okay, I'm going to be the guy that's going to commit to making lacrosse a full-time job for people who are talented enough to play it. He's really, he's trying to do a brand new sports model. And if you read the Sports Illustrated article, he knows he's got a plan. I mean, initially when he announced, okay, we're going to have these teams, but it's basically going to be a traveling circus. We're going to go from town to town. There's not going to be any home teams. There's not, we're going to this festival atmosphere. I was initially appalled. I mean, I'm an old school guy. I want my team, my home team. I want them playing in my stadium. Wave the pennant, rah rah. And he's saying, no, look, with the internet, people aren't connected to their home team. They pick whoever they want. And largely they're picking who they want based on players. And he specifically cited LeBron James. I mean, there weren't Miami Heat or Cleveland Cavalier or Los Angeles Lakers fans. They're LeBron James fans. And he's saying, look, you don't need home teams anymore. With the internet, one, you're following a player, not the team. Two, to the extent you want to follow the team, you get on the internet and you read about them. You get on TV and you watch them. It's not like baseball in the 19th century when everyone in the city went to the ballpark and root for the home team. And yeah, part of me is horrified to think he might be right, but I guess we're going to find out. I mean, if PLL takes off, and because people want this traveling circus thing, and that's what's going to bring the numbers out, and that's what's going to bring the revenue. And as we know, any kind of live sports, it's the only live programming on television people won't tape and skip the ads for. He's going to command, they're going to get a TV presence. It might be, it would be the next big thing, and it would be interesting that, a sport that, even as we've talked about, has been around literally for centuries and on a organized level over 100 years, a sport that's one of the oldest in North America is now seen as like the sport of the millennials, and a very millennial league might be, in concept, might be the thing that winds up pushing it over the hump and making it one of the major pro sports in this country.
Do you think that MLL can survive this this shot across the bow and perhaps maybe become the next Retro-Lax feature on your site?
we go to 97 and.
we were joking with the labor dispute. I was telling David, say, oh boy, if the current NLL folds, I'm going to have a lot of work to do over the Thanksgiving weekend. We focus on the dead leagues, and I don't want NLL to become one, and I don't want MLL to become one. But sort of drawing on, they say, the past is prologue, right? And so drawing on my soccer experience, historian-wise, anyway. No, I don't see MLL. I don't necessarily see it folding, but it's not going to get past, notwithstanding they've expanded the schedule and they're going to bump up salaries and they're not going to compete with indoors, so they don't have that overlap. And they're also not going to compete with college. They're going to start their season a little later, so they're not stepping on, the college playoffs and what becomes their, Final Four weekend. But I don't see them looking at the facilities where they play and everything else. I don't see them getting past the 3,000 a game figure where they've been, for the last few years. I don't know if they're going to fold right away, but it's certainly they're not going to grow either. So it might be like the old American Soccer League. As the NASL was flourishing, we just watched the old ASL sort of limp along, trying to be relevant, never really getting there, and then ultimately folding. That may be where MLL is going to go. But I think their plan may be, they may be a bit cynical like I am, and they say, no, look, people don't want the traveling circus. The carnival's coming to town approach. PLL can't sustain this. They'll be gone in no time, and we'll get these players back, and we'll go back to the slow and steady growth we had in mind. So, time will tell. Yeah,
I actually think that, maybe one of the interesting solves for all this could be which outdoor field league can figure out a way to align itself much more harmoniously with the box side on National Lacrosse League, right? Because you could make the argument, I'm just really pulling this one out here, but you could make the argument that whichever one kind of does that could actually be a more, a viable from a player perspective and maybe from a franchise stability perspective, a way to kind of counter whichever other outdoor league winds up succeeding. It's interesting. Now you got the other issue is you've got three leagues essentially. You could also now make the argument: is there enough talent? And do we risk, as Steve would probably remember, a 1967-68 soccer thing with, two leagues competing with each other when arguably there might be room for one?
It's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out. I'll agree with you there.
I imagine, though, too, that it's also a heady time to being a lacrosse fan. Let me ask you, as we sort of went around the curve here, let me ask you on the retrolax.com stuff. So give us a sense more of what you envision this to further become besides a repository for just some really amazing video, and I suspect probably some more supplemental and or archival content And I guess I'm most specifically interested in the reaction, if any, or the awareness and cooperation, if any, with either the National Lacrosse Hall of Fame, either the Canadian version or the U.S. version, and or the current, let's say, National Lacrosse League, who may or may not want to embrace the past?
I know that Steve has been working with the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame out in Vancouver. I've been working with the Ontario Lacrosse Hall of Fame in St. Kitts. The vision is to keep on adding and creating the content as it becomes available. What you see now is a start. Steve is writing currently. He's wrote more than me because I've been on the film end of it. I'm working on the first of many documentaries that highlight certain teams, certain aspects, this, that, the whole 9 yards. Our website is basically going to the library. You want to learn about a certain team, a certain player, this, that, the whole 9 yards. It's just there for you to learn from. We're not in the business to make a dime off of anything that we're doing. It could easily be done, but it's not what it's all about. It's about sharing, archiving, and giving the average fan or somebody that's new to the game a learning experience that it's like, this is cool, you know? It's just about sharing what we have at our disposal at the time with everybody on a worldwide basis. And the acceptance of when we launched the night before Thanksgiving has been totally overwhelming to this point, to the point to where the server crashed not once but twice. Everything just went just like that. And it was like, wow. And we got about, it recovered, and it just is, it's amazed me to look at the statistics since Thanksgiving Eve and the responses from people. And me and Steve sit back and we talk almost daily, if not daily. And it's like, you believe this? And so we must be doing something right. We're not trying to toot our own horn or give ourselves a pat on the back, but we're doing something right. And it's just basically for Tim to come along and it's like, yeah, I learned something today, and we'll get an email and it's like, yeah, boom, 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 and we go back and forth. And that's basically, it's basically what we're sharing with people and people are sharing with us, and it's only going to get bigger. And I couldn't be more, I just like banged my head against the wall. It's like, why am I getting back into this? This is why I'm getting back into it. Because of, the excitement's back again. And I couldn't be more pleased with the relative outcome. I mean, as I said, it's never going to be a done deal with, okay, we're out of material. Dear God, no. We're going to continue to research. We're going to continue to investigate. We're going to continue to receive, and we're going to write and document everything that comes in. And hopefully everybody is happy with what we're doing.
And I'm happy to report that the National Lacrosse League has shown interest in what we're doing. I've had a meeting with Nick Sakevich, the commissioner. We had a connection going to the Philadelphia Union days. And so when he heard what we were doing, he knew about the soccer history stuff, and he appreciates history. So as opposed to, say, MLS, Major League Soccer, which has never really been one to embrace what had gone before, showing that there are deep roots, it helps market the current version of the game. But to give credit where it's due, Dave used the word library. And I got to tell you, that was his concept. That was his idea, and it's been huge. Well, initially I was just writing. I was just happy to write my articles, and they get posted where they get posted. And Dave said, hey, I'm going to bring the site back. Would you write for me? I said, sure. And then he said, okay, well, we're also going to do, we're going to put, primary sources on the site. And at first I was thinking, oh, well, why would I want to do that? Because then other people are just going to write instead of me. But then as I warmed to the idea, it was brilliant. like he says, if someone wants to learn a little bit about the game, if someone else wants to write and they need a place to access material, because not everyone has a subscription to newspapers.com. Not everyone's got the collection of memorabilia that Dave and I have, old programs and media guides and whatnot. They can not just learn about the game casually, but if they decide, hey, like Long Island's going to get a new team, allegedly, not allegedly, it's worst kept secret in NLL right now. Some kid in Long Island decides, well, I want to read about more. He decides he's going to read about the New York Titans and the New York Saints. He decides he's going to read about the Long Island Tomahawks. Maybe he'll decide he wants to write about it. Libraries, it's the perfect metaphor for what Dave came up with RetroLax. And it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I've been doing, in different sports, I've been doing this for a long time. I haven't been as enthused about, doing something with sports history as I have been with this site it was about March when Dave contacted me. So it's been about 6 months now? 6, 7 months?
At least.
Terrible math, 8 months, whatever. I haven't had this much fun in years. And people, as you said, it's grandsons of people who played. It's people who did play. All kinds of people reaching out to this thing. Oh, this is great. I didn't know this. I never saw this picture before. Oh, thank you so much. It's not only fun to do, but it's so gratifying to see it's appreciated. And it's really, it's even 10 days old now, whatever. It's been a blast.
All right. Well, let's get some promotion here. Give us, tell us the site, how else people can reach you and or follow you. Here's your chance.
Okay. Well, the website is basic RetroLax, RetroLax.com. We have a Facebook page, which is RetroLax Lacrosse. And then Steve set up everything else, so I'm going to let him go from here.
Yeah. We have Twitter, which is at RetroLax, which is RetroLax _, because apparently RetroLax is a Pokemon thing, so I couldn't get the name. So it's at RetroLax _. And we also have an Instagram account, which is, I think that's also RetroLax Lacrosse, where, you get to see the old pictures and stuff.
That's awesome. Well, guys, this has been awesome. I appreciate it very much. And, you even if you don't consider yourself a lacrosse fan out there, you will lose a few minutes, maybe an hour or two, perhaps even more if you're really into it, by delving into retrolax.com and what these gentlemen have put together, and obviously more to come. But, as a child of the 70s myself, and having grown up watching, things like North American Soccer League and being fascinated by the ABA and the WHA and WTT and all these other leagues that sort of blossomed in the 70s, right? The one league that kind of sort of I completely missed first go around was this National Lacrosse League. And having gotten into the game when the Major Indoor Lacrosse League really started to get going in the late 80s, early 90s, it was fascinating to me to realize that there was a history, at least a pro history. Certainly I knew the other history of it, generally. And that's what this is all about. And we do these shows. I don't know. Frankly, I'm not exactly sure why we do them, but I think part of it is because there is rich history and stories and things to be explored that, today's modern sports world either could learn from, or generations of fans today might be intrigued by, to kind of understand, upon the backs of which current businesses and or leagues and or Premier Lacrosse Leagues, et cetera, get founded and hopefully successful. So kudos, guys, for your passion. And I think it's fair to say that folks who take an interest in this, I'm sure, I hope a little contribution maybe to get you a few more pieces to help continue to build your tower of greatness around the sport of lacrosse.
We'll see where it goes from here. And as I said, we started from the ground and we're working our way up, and it can only go from there.
Yeah, and Tim, thanks for your interest. I mean, across the board in all sports. I mean, the podcast is great because there's so much history out there, and it's a lot of fun. And thank you for between football and baseball and basketball, there's plenty out there. Thanks for taking the time to pay a little attention to lacrosse, and hopefully, this will just get bigger.
All
All right, there it is. I learned a ton on this show, and lacrosse, the pro version of such, is one of those very sort of interesting nooks and crannies that kind of escaped my sort of purview, and I'm just fascinated. I'm fascinated by it, the sport's future, as well as its very deep past. I'm also fascinated, frankly, by people like Steve and Dave, who just get tremendous thrill and for little to no financial gain by any means. The sheer joy of discovering and preserving the history of a sport they love and that they've become huge fans of and want to share and extend that knowledge and passion with other people similarly interested, perhaps possibly to become similarly interested. And that's what we like to sort of celebrate here on this show. And we always learn something as we do so. And that's I guess that's kind of the cool thing. That's why we do this. And we appreciate your listening to learn with us as we sort of go through these little journeys. The website that Steve and Dave have put together, it's called retrolax.com. That's RETROLAX.com. And again, a fair warning, you will lose a lot of time. So make sure you've got a lot of spare time when you go to this site, because some of the video is amazing, and it's hard to believe that this was not only a league, but that it was actually recorded and aired on various television stations and whatnot. And it's really cool stuff, and it's obviously a great heritage for what is now, I would argue, a mini renaissance again in lacrosse's professional popularity. That's retrolax.com. On Facebook, you'll find them at Retrolax Lacrosse. On Instagram, you'll find them at Retrolax Lacrosse. And on Twitter, as you heard Steve say, you'll find them, of course, at Retrolax_. Make sure that underscore is there. Or you will be whisked away into the world of Pokemon, apparently, by doing so. Let's see. So we appreciate, of course, your listening. And we, of course, want to say thank you to our friends at Podfly Productions. And, of course, the good doctor, Jerry Payne, who painstakingly, puts our pieces together each and every week. You can find more about them at podfly.net. Check them out. And one last thing I want to say, the audio clip that you heard at the beginning of the show was not indeed me doing an imitation, but that was the original John Facenda of NFL Films fame, doing looks like a promo video, I think, from 1975. And not a surprise, he being in NFL Films, being based in South Jersey / Philadelphia metropolitan area, Mr. Facenda was quite a bit involved in lots of Philadelphia-related challenger leagues and sports and that kind of stuff. And we hope you enjoyed that little clip. And we love to find those things, too, as part of the whole mix. So, again, we appreciate your listening. And we'll see you and talk to you next week, hopefully a little bit healthier sounding. And until then, take care, everybody. We love you for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye.